Good evening, dear listeners. I am Professor Somnus, and let my voice carry you back through time to experience 24 hours in the life of someone history has largely forgotten. And tonight, as the rain falls gently against your windows, I invite you to journey with me into a single day 7 centuries past. Close your eyes, settle into your comfortable bed. When was the last time you were really, truly hungry? Not the mild inconvenience of a delayed dinner, but something deeper. As you lie there now, warm beneath your covers, safe in your home, I want you to imagine a different kind of hunger entirely. A hunger so deep it is the first and only thing you feel when your eyes open to the gray, pre-dawn light of a filthy medieval alley. A hunger so profound it becomes the very lens through which you see the world. This is not an annoyance. This is not a temporary state. This hunger is not just an inconvenience. It has become, for all intents and purposes, your entire existence. You are a vessel for hunger itself. It is the sun you orbit, the master you serve, the rhythm that governs every waking moment of this single, endless day. But the world is already harsh beyond modern comprehension. And this, from its wretched beginning at 4 in the morning to its uncertain end 20 hours later, is your day. You are not a person who is hungry, but in the absolute darkness of the pre-dawn hours, there is no cheerful cock's crow here in the narrow alley behind the tannery. Only the slow, agonizing return to consciousness as your body rebels against the stone that has served as your bed, drips steadily onto your face as you lie pressed against the cold stone wall. Sleep is a luxury for those with beds and blankets and doors that lock. In your time, there are no street lamps, no electric signs. Locked into position by the cold and by the awkward angles forced upon you by the uneven stone, you begin with your fingers, slowly flexing them despite the sharp pain in the knuckles. They have gone partially numb during the night, and the first attempts to bend them send waves of sharp, the persistent itch of lice moving in your hair and beard, the sharp smell of your own unwashed body, a scent you have grown accustomed to, but which still occasionally surprises you with its intensity, the taste in your mouth, a combination of hunger, poor teeth, and the general corruption that comes from a diet of scraps and refuse. Needle-like pain shooting from your hips to your ankles. You have learned to be patient with this process, to work slowly and methodically through the restoration of mobility. Rushing leads to falls, and a fall in your condition could mean injury you cannot afford to sustain. Then your wrists, your elbows, working methodically up your arms until you can place your palms flat against the wall. No ambient glow from windows, where you can feel each bone distinctly outlined beneath your skin. There was more flesh there once, when you were Thomas the Cooper, when you had a workshop and a wife and enough to eat. But months of inadequate food have stripped away the padding that once protected your bones from the harsh realities of sleeping on stone. When the sun sets, the world becomes a place of absolute blackness, broken only by the occasional flicker of candlelight behind a window shutter or the distant glow of a torch carried by the night watch. You have learned to navigate by sound and by the memory of daytime landmarks, feeling your way along walls like a blind man. What you have experienced is something closer to a series of brief escapes from awareness, moments when exhaustion overwhelmed even the persistent ache of hunger and the bite of cold. But your body will not let you rest for long. The shivering wakes you every hour or so, violent tremors that convulse your entire frame as your body fights desperately to generate warmth. You are a beggar in a medieval English market town in the year 1347. The date is October 15th, a Tuesday that will stretch before you like an eternity. It is a pain so familiar it has become part of you, like the rhythm of your heartbeat or the sound of your breathing. You cannot remember the last time you woke without it. 3 days ago, 4. Time blurs when each day is identical in its misery. The Black Death has not yet arrived. Your thin tunic, the only clothing you own, is damp from the persistent drizzle that has been falling since midnight. The fabric clings to your skin like a second layer of cold, and you know that this dampness will stay with you throughout the day, a constant reminder of your vulnerability to the elements. Listen to the rain falling softly around us. In your time, this same rain falls differently. It seeps through the gaps in the timber buildings above you. This rain, which sounds so peaceful to you now listening, is both salvation and curse. It pools in the gutters, offering precious drinking water, but it also brings the bone-deep cold that has already claimed 3 beggars this month. 4 a.m. The first awakening your day begins not with the gentle warmth of sunrise. You have not truly slept. The darkness around you is complete and disorienting. Your first sensation, even before full consciousness returns, is the hollow ache in your stomach. The cold stone beneath you has leached away what little body heat you possessed. 4:30 a.m. The ritual of rising. Getting to your feet is a monumental effort that requires careful planning. Your joints have stiffened during the night. Rolling onto your side sends a spike of agony through your ribs. Your legs are the worst part. As feeling returns to your extremities, you become aware of other sensations. 5 a.m. The morning assessment. Once you have achieved a standing position, leaning heavily against the wall for support, you begin the daily inventory of your condition and possessions. This is a ritual as important as any prayer. The tunic that serves as your only garment is a patchwork of repairs. A wooden bowl, cracked but still functional. It contains your entire wealth, perhaps 6 or 7 copper coins accumulated over the past week, along with a small piece of hard cheese wrapped in cloth. You start to orient yourself within the complex geography of your daily existence. The alley where you have spent the night is just one small corner of a territory. You know as intimately as any scholar knows his manuscripts. This pouch represents the difference between eating today and going hungry. You know which alleys offer protection from the wind, which doorways are deep enough to provide some shelter from rain, which corners are far enough from the main thoroughfares to avoid unwanted attention from the town watch. You begin the careful process of leaving your nighttime shelter, but for its effect on your overall condition throughout the day ahead. Every movement must be considered, not just for its immediate purpose, where the honest workers of the town are beginning their own days. Through shuttered windows, you can hear the sounds of families waking, but theft is a crime punishable by mutilation or death. Master Geoffrey is protective of his property and suspicious of beggars who linger near his establishment. The bread cooling on his windowsills represents a temptation almost impossible to resist. The missing hand or foot of a caught thief serves as a permanent warning to others who might be tempted to take what is not freely given. Children being fed, wives preparing the morning meal. These sounds, which once formed the background of your own life when you were Thomas the Cooper. Master Geoffrey the Baker begins his work before dawn, now serve as painful reminders of everything you have lost. Energy is a finite resource, that must be carefully managed. A scent so rich and wonderful it makes your stomach contract with longing, preparing the loaves that will feed the town throughout the day. You know his schedule intimately. Know that the first batch will emerge from his ovens just as the church bell rings for prime, the first service of the day. Rationed like food or water, between having a copper to pay for shelter and spending another night on stone, keeping close to the walls. Your bare feet silent on the damp cobblestones. The art of being invisible has become second nature to you. In a world where your very existence is seen as a problem to be solved, the ability to move unnoticed is often the difference between a peaceful day and one filled with harassment, violence, or imprisonment. A man whose reaction to finding beggars near his establishment varies dramatically depending on his mood and the state of his business. On good days, when orders are plentiful and his family is healthy, Master Edmund tolerates overnight shelter in his alley, barely, but he will not allow beggars to linger past sunrise. The presence of the destitute is bad for business, frightening away customers who prefer not to be reminded of how quickly fortune can change. In a few minutes, you will need to begin your migration toward the areas of town where begging is more tolerated and potentially more profitable. He might toss you a copper coin or the remnants of his breakfast. On bad days, he has been known to emerge with a stout stick and chase beggars away with threats and blows. That serves as your primary tool for receiving alms. The leatherworking trade begins early, and already you can hear the faint sounds of movement in the workshop overhead. The rhythmic scraping that indicates he is working a hide, the occasional thump of tools being moved about, a length of rope barely 3 feet long, the low murmur of voices that suggests his apprentice has arrived to begin the day's work. A small piece of flint and a rusty iron striker, wrapped carefully in a scrap of leather, represents your ability to make fire when fuel can be found. That can serve a dozen different purposes, from belt to binding to emergency food container, mended with scraps of cloth, begged or scavenged from various sources. You check the seams carefully, looking for new tears that might need attention before they become larger problems. In winter, even a small hole can mean the difference between survival and death. Sometimes, in the depths of exhausted sleep, a careful assessment of your resources and limitations that will determine your strategy for the day ahead. Your body first. You run your hands along your ribs, checking for new sources of pain that might indicate injury sustained during the night. You move wrong against the stone and damage something without realizing it. Your feet receive special attention as they are your most valuable assets. Hidden beneath your tunic, any cut, any swelling, any sign of infection could render you unable to walk, and a beggar who cannot walk is a beggar who will die. Your clothing comes next. Your possessions are few but precious. Most important of all, you check the small leather pouch that hangs around your neck. 5:30 a.m. The geography of survival. As the first hint of gray begins to lighten the absolute darkness. Every doorway, every corner, every gap between buildings has been evaluated and cataloged in terms of its potential for shelter, safety, and opportunity. The building above you houses Master Edmund the Tanner today. You listen carefully for any sounds from above that might indicate his mood or intentions. You know you must move soon. 6 a.m. The first movement as the gray light grows marginally brighter. You move slowly down the alley. The first stage of your daily journey takes you through the craftsman's quarter. The smell of baking bread begins to drift from the bakery on Mill Street. But you also know that approaching the bakery too early is dangerous. 6:30 a.m., the dawn chorus, as you make your way through the gradually awakening town. You become part of an invisible community of early risers who exist at the margins of respectable society. Other beggars emerge from their own hiding places, each beginning their own daily pilgrimage in search of sustenance and survival. There is old Martha, his brown robes marking him as one of those whose poverty is chosen rather than imposed. Even in his deliberate destitution, he commands a respect that you will never receive. His begging is seen as holy, a spiritual discipline that brings him closer to God. Yours is seen as evidence of moral failure. The art of begging requires a delicate balance between visibility and invisibility, between making your need known and avoiding the appearance of aggression or threat. You have learned through painful experience where to stand, how to hold yourself, what words to speak that might move a hardened heart to momentary compassion, each hour bringing its own challenges and opportunities. You have survived the dark hours before dawn, navigated the dangerous transition from night to day, and positioned yourself for whatever meager chances the morning might bring. A burden on society that exists only through the grudging charity of your betters passes by with her servant carrying her prayer book and a small purse for offerings, his eyes deliberately averted from your presence. He is a man who has worked hard for his prosperity and believes firmly that poverty is a moral failing rather than a misfortune. In his view, able-bodied beggars are simply lazy parasites who choose to live off the labor of others rather than work honestly for their bread. He saves his charity for the church itself, preferring to support the institution rather than its individual supplicants. She is one of the town's most reliable sources of charity, motivated by a genuine fear of purgatory and a desire to accumulate spiritual merit through good works. But she is also discerning in her giving, preferring to support those she considers deserving of aid. A well-rehearsed tale of misfortune, delivered with appropriate humility, might earn you a copper coin from her purse. Who lost her husband and sons to the fever 3 years ago, and now survives by reciting prayers for the dead in exchange for small coins, the result of a birth defect that has marked him as unemployable in a world that values physical capability above all else. He specializes in positioning himself near the church during services, his deformity serving as a visible reminder of God's mysterious ways and the virtue of charitable giving. 20 more hours of hunger and cold, and the constant grinding effort required simply to continue existing in a world that would prefer to forget you entirely. His youth and obvious disability make him more sympathetic to potential donors than an able-bodied man like yourself. Her voice, cracked with age and grief, can often be heard in the churchyard at dawn, offering her services to anyone who will listen. The sound echoes off the stone buildings and narrow streets, a bronze voice that has marked the hours in this town for 3 centuries. For you, the bell serves a different purpose than it does for the respectable citizens hurrying toward their prayers. It marks the beginning of the day's opportunities, the moment when the town's daily life begins in earnest and the possibility of charity becomes real. She nods to you as your paths cross, a gesture of recognition between fellow sufferers, but there is no warmth in it. In the harsh mathematics of survival, every other beggar represents competition for the limited charity available. Young William limps past on his twisted foot. Brother Francis, one of the mendicant friars, walks purposefully toward the monastery. 7 a.m. The bells call, the church bell begins to toll, calling the faithful to the first service of the day. You position yourself carefully as the first worshippers begin to emerge from their homes. The wealthy merchant's wife, Mistress Joan, Master Robert the goldsmith, walks quickly past. The day stretches ahead of you like an endless road, but this is only the beginning. 20 more hours remain before you can return to your stone bed in the Tanner's Alley. Part 2. The Morning Hunt. 7:30 a.m. The church steps strategy as the bell's bronze voice fades into the morning air. You begin the careful approach to your primary hunting ground, the steps of St. Bartholomew's Church. This massive stone edifice dominates the town square, but they are also the most contested and dangerous, moving slowly and deliberately. Whose tongue was cut out years ago for reasons she has never been able to communicate. Her mutilation, whether the result of legal punishment or random violence, far enough from the prime positions to avoid conflict, close enough to the flow of worshippers to make your presence known. And the first worshippers begin to file inside for the morning service. A penny for the love of Christ. God bless the charitable heart. The words are worn smooth by constant repetition. Dame Margaret, the baker's wife, stops directly in front of you with her hands planted firmly on her hips. Her husband's business brings her into regular contact with beggars seeking discarded bread, and she has developed strong opinions about their worthiness. She looks you up and down with the practiced eye of someone who believes she can distinguish between the truly needy and the merely lazy, delivered in a tone carefully calibrated to be audible without being intrusive, humble without being certain. Why do you not seek honest work instead of troubling good Christian folk with your begging? Her voice carries the righteous indignation of someone who has worked hard for everything she possesses and sees no reason why others should not do the same. This is your moment of greatest opportunity and greatest vulnerability. The people entering the church are in a state of spiritual preparation, caught between his son's obvious distaste and his wife's expectant gaze. The internal struggle plays out across his features as he weighs social pressure against spiritual obligation. Finally, with the air of a man performing an unpleasant but necessary duty, he drops a single copper coin into your bowl without meeting your eyes. The coin lands with a satisfying ring against the wooden bottom, and you respond with a torrent of blessings, calling down God's favor upon his business, his family, his immortal soul. Their minds turn toward thoughts of sin and redemption, heaven and hell. Some will be moved to charity by these contemplations. Others will be irritated by any reminder of worldly suffering that might distract from their prayers. You arrange yourself carefully, adopting the posture that experience has taught you is most effective, seated but not sprawling, their fine wool garments marking them as among the town's most prosperous citizens. His wife, Mistress Eleanor, carries a small leather purse dedicated specifically to charitable giving, a common practice among the wealthy who wish to demonstrate their piety publicly. But their teenage son, young Henry, wrinkles his nose in disgust as he passes your position, and you hear him whisper to his father about the unpleasant smell of unwashed beggars spoiling the sanctity of God's house. Head bowed in apparent prayer, one hand extended with palm upward in the universal gesture of supplication, has become her primary asset in the economy of pity. She gestures eloquently with her hands, pointing to her mouth and then to her empty bowl, her silent plea often more effective than any spoken words, your eyes scanning for both opportunities and threats. Blind Peter may be sightless, but his hearing is acute, and he has allies among the other beggars who protect his territory in exchange for a share of his earnings. Silent Mary has been known to produce a hidden knife when her position is threatened, her inability to speak making her doubly dangerous and unpredictable. Near the main entrance, you spot Blind Peter, who has claimed the prime position at the foot of the great oak doors. His sightless eyes and the obvious genuineness of his disability make him a favorite among the charitable. Coins ring regularly into his wooden bowl as the faithful pass by, moved by the clear evidence of God's mysterious afflictions. Every beggar in town knows their value, and the competition for the best positions is fierce and sometimes violent. You have learned through months of observation that success here depends not just on need, but on timing, positioning, and the delicate art of reading human nature. Its towers reaching toward heaven like stone prayers, its bells marking the rhythm of daily life for every soul within miles. The church steps represent the most promising territory for charitable giving. You approach from the east side. To Peter's left sits Silent Mary. You know better than to challenge these established positions directly. Instead, you find a spot on the lower steps. 8 a.m. The Mass begins. The great doors of the church swing open with a groan of ancient iron hinges. You begin the quiet litany that has become as familiar as breathing. Alms for the poor, good Christian souls. Master Thomas, the cloth merchant, approaches with his family. Master Thomas pauses for a moment, but not all encounters are so successful. Strong arms, she announces loudly enough for other passers-by to hear. Strong back. 8:30 a.m. The theological debate, Dame Margaret's challenge, creates a small crowd of onlookers, as public confrontations always do in a society where entertainment is scarce and gossip is currency. His theological training has given him strong opinions about the proper relationship between charity and social order. Any man can fall, he says quietly. Fire, flood, sickness, war, fortunes, wheel, turns, for all of us. Better to err on the side of mercy than to risk turning away Christ himself. Approaches the growing crowd with interest. His own chosen poverty gives him a unique perspective on the debate. But the church bell begins to toll again, calling the faithful to the start of the Mass. The crowd gradually disperses, the accusation that lies beneath every suspicious glance and reluctant donation. You consider your answer carefully, searching for signs of deception. Your story is plausible. Such disasters are common enough in a world where fortune can change with terrifying speed. But it is also convenient, impossible to verify. It bears the seal of St. Bartholomew's Church and identifies you as Thomas, late of Millbrook, fallen into honest poverty through fire and pestilence, deemed worthy of Christian charity by examination of his case. Next to your few coins and precious scrap of cheese, the act of safeguarding this document becomes a ritual of hope, a tangible reminder that somewhere in the world, at least one person has acknowledged your humanity and vouched for your worthiness to continue existing. The formal language transforms your personal tragedy into an official category, your individual suffering into an administrative decision, the sort of tale any clever beggar might concoct to elicit sympathy, knowing that your response may determine whether this priest becomes an ally or an enemy in the uncertain days ahead. I cannot give you work, he says. He reaches into his robes and produces a small piece of parchment, already prepared with official-looking script and seal. This is a letter of recommendation, certifying that you are a legitimate recipient of Christian charity, not a fraudulent vagabond. It will not guarantee you food or shelter, but it may protect you from arrest and punishment if the town guard questions your right to seek alms, for the church has little enough to maintain itself, each person carrying away their own interpretation of what they have witnessed. I was once Thomas the Cooper, with workshop and family, guild membership, and good reputation. Fire took my livelihood. The letter represents Father Benedict's personal judgment, not the official policy of the church hierarchy. A different priest in a different town might question its validity, particularly if your appearance or behavior fails to match their expectations of a deserving poor person. And the letter itself is fragile, susceptible to damage from rain or rough handling, irreplaceable if lost or destroyed. In an increasingly bureaucratic world, documentation has become essential for survival at the margins of society. Without official sanction, a beggar can be arrested as a vagrant, punished as an idle wanderer, or simply driven from town to town until exhaustion or exposure claims their life. Sickness took my wife and children. Debt took everything else. I have sought work in every town within walking distance, but who will hire a man with no tools, no references, no fixed address? I beg not because I prefer it to work, but because no other path remains open to me. Dame Margaret departs with a final sniff of disapproval, but not before dropping a small copper coin into your bowl with obvious reluctance. For the love of Christ, she mutters, though I fear I do you no service by encouraging your idleness. Perhaps, he suggests gently, we should remember that our Lord himself had no place to lay his head. His young face is troubled, caught between the competing demands of pastoral care and social order. Tell me truly, he says, in a voice too low for others to hear, are you truly unable to work, or do you choose this life because it seems easier than honest labor? The poverty of these unfortunates may serve God's purpose in ways we cannot understand, providing opportunities for the charitable to practice virtue and for the poor themselves to learn patience and humility, who might come to us disguised as the least among us. Scripture tells us that those who will not work should not eat, he says, quoting St. Paul's second letter to the Thessalonians. But it also commands us to feed the hungry and clothe the naked. The question becomes how to distinguish between the deserving poor who suffer through no fault of their own and the idle vagabonds who choose begging over honest labor. You find yourself at the center of an impromptu theological and social debate about the nature of poverty, work, and Christian duty. Father Benedict, the young priest who assists the elderly Pastor William, pauses on his way into the church. Master John, the carpenter, whose arthritic hands have begun to limit his own ability to work, offers a more sympathetic perspective. Having learned that any attempt to defend yourself will only make the situation worse, the words wash over you like rain, each speaker using your existence as a prop in their own moral performance. You are not a person to them in this moment, but a symbol, a test case for their competing theories about poverty and virtue. But Dame Margaret is not swayed by such arguments. Look at him, she insists, pointing directly at you. No visible infirmity, no obvious deformity. In my day, such men would be put in the stocks until they agreed to work for their bread. This new fashion of treating beggars as if they were holy hermits encourages sloth and undermines the natural order that God has established. You remain silent throughout this debate. Young Brother Francis, the Franciscan friar you encountered earlier. 9 a.m. The resolution and its consequences. The debate might have continued indefinitely. Father Benedict lingers for a moment after the others have gone. This is the question that haunts every healthy beggar. Father, you reply, your voice hoarse from disuse and the constant dampness. The priest studies your face intently. Finally, he nods slowly. But I can offer you something, perhaps more valuable. 9:30 a.m. The value of documentation. The piece of parchment Father Benedict places in your hands is more precious than gold, more valuable than a week's worth of food. The letter is written in Latin, incomprehensible to you, but impressive to anyone with education. But you also understand the precarious nature of this protection. You fold the parchment carefully and place it in your inner pouch. 10 a.m., the morning's accounting. As the Mass begins inside the church and the flow of potential donors dwindles to nothing, you take stock of the morning's results, or a night's shelter in the corner of a stable. If the weather turns particularly harsh, follows no predictable pattern, joints protesting after an hour of motionless sitting on cold stone, the morning's hunting is complete, burning off some of the night's dampness, but bringing little warmth to your aching bones. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks and a child laughs, sounds of normal life continuing its ancient rhythms, while you navigate the shadow world that exists alongside but separate from the community of the living. But the day stretches ahead with its own demands and opportunities. You begin the treacherous journey toward the market square, the beating heart of the town's commercial life. Here, beneath the shadow of the great market cross, where proclamations are read and justice is dispensed, the daily drama of buying and selling unfolds in all its chaotic glory. He is known throughout the market for his violent hatred of beggars, whom he views as thieves waiting for their moment to strike. Last month, you witnessed him beat a desperate woman with a wooden club when she tried to gather the fish scraps from beneath his stall. Her cries echoed across the marketplace, but no one intervened. In the complex social hierarchy of medieval life, a merchant's right to protect his property far outweighs a beggar's right to survive, which you snatch up and conceal within the folds of your ragged tunic in a single fluid motion. The entire operation takes perhaps 5 seconds, but in those moments your heart pounds with the adrenaline of a successful hunt and the terror of potential discovery. For a beggar, the marketplace represents both opportunity and extreme danger, a place where sustenance might be found, but where the wrong move can bring swift and brutal punishment, where the press of customers is thinner and your presence less likely to be noticed by the merchants. Here begins the delicate dance of urban scavenging, a choreographed performance of patience, timing, and desperate courage that you have perfected through months of practice. Other territories must be explored, rolling slowly across the cobblestones after falling from a customer's overloaded basket. It is bruised and dirty, but underneath the skin lies flesh that could ease the gnawing in your stomach for precious hours. But between you and the apple stands a complex web of obstacles. The baker's apprentice carrying a tray of fresh loaves, the blacksmith's wife examining a bolt of cloth, a group of children playing with wooden hoops, their laughter ringing across the square like church bells. Other strategies attempted for the precise moment when all eyes are turned elsewhere. The apple continues its slow roll toward a puddle of murky water, and you know that once it reaches that contaminated pool, even your desperate hunger will not overcome the risk of disease. The timing must be perfect. Too early, and you will be seen and likely beaten for attempted theft. Too late, and the apple will be ruined beyond even your ability to stomach it. Merchants cry out their wares in voices trained to carry over the crowd. Fresh fish from the river, caught this very morning. Two customers are arguing loudly over the price of a length of blue wool, their voices rising in indignation as each accuses the other of attempting fraud. Every head in the immediate area turns toward the dispute, drawn by the promise of entertainment in a world where public arguments serve as free theater for the masses. Bread, warm from the oven. White bread for the gentry. Ale, good ale, brewed by honest Christian hands. Their voices blend into a symphony of commerce that speaks of abundance you can witness but never truly taste. Other small victories pursued in the endless campaign for survival. Arranging his catch with the practiced eye of a man who knows that presentation means profit. Pike and perch glisten on beds of wet straw, their dead eyes reflecting the gray sky above. But your attention is drawn to the ground beneath his stall, where the inevitable detritus of his trade creates opportunities for scavenging. Fish heads, scales, the occasional bit of flesh clinging to discarded bones. These cast-offs represent protein that could sustain you for hours. Fish scales glitter like silver coins in the weak sunlight, while cabbage leaves and apple cores create a treacherous carpet of decay. You move carefully, not just to avoid slipping, but because these discarded scraps represent potential food. A bruised turnip, kicked aside by a fastidious customer, becomes a treasure worth the risk of diving into the muck to retrieve. A morning that begins well may lead to an afternoon of empty bowls and harsh words. Conversely, a day that starts with disappointment may end with unexpected kindness from an unknown benefactor. The only certainty is uncertainty. The only constant is the grinding need that drives you from hour to hour, coin to coin, meal to meal. The bread, though hard enough to crack a tooth, can be softened with water and will provide sustenance for hours to come. Your wooden bowl contains 4 copper coins and a small piece of hard bread, donated by an elderly woman whose own obvious poverty made her gift doubly precious. By the standards of your current existence, this represents a successful start to the day. You notice a new arrival, a family of displaced peasants, their possessions loaded onto a single ox cart, their children's faces gaunt with hunger. They are refugees from some distant disaster, war or famine or plague, beginning their own descent into the world you know so well. The sight fills you with a complex mixture of sympathy and dread, for you recognize in their bewildered faces the same expression you once wore when Thomas the Cooper first realized that his old life was gone forever. The coins represent immediate possibilities, perhaps a bowl of thin gruel from the cookshop that caters to laborers and travelers. But success in begging, you have learned. You rise from your position on the church steps as you prepare to leave the relative safety of the church grounds. The morning hunt is ending, but the day's real challenges are just beginning. The sun climbs higher in the gray sky. Part 3, the midday crucible, 10:30 a.m. The market square hunt with the morning's church charity complete. The cobblestones beneath your bare feet are slick with the morning rain and the accumulated refuse of commerce. The cacophony of market day assaults your senses from every direction. Master Geoffrey the fishmonger stands behind his wooden stall, but approaching Master Geoffrey's stall requires careful strategy. 11 a.m. The dance of survival. You position yourself at the edge of the market square. Your target is a dropped apple. You wait, patient as a cat stalking a mouse. The moment comes when a commotion erupts near the cloth merchant's stall. You move swiftly but carefully, your bare feet silent on the wet stones. 3 quick steps bring you to the apple, which you snatch up and conceal within the folds of your ragged tunic in a single fluid motion. The entire operation takes perhaps 5 seconds. But in those moments, your heart pounds with the adrenaline of a successful hunt and the terror of potential discovery. 11:30 a.m. The encounter with authority, for as you attempt to fade back into the crowd, broad-shouldered and thick-armed from years of wrestling unruly drunks and petty criminals into submission, his face bears the scars of countless confrontations, and his eyes hold the weary cynicism of someone who has seen every variety of human vice and folly. To him, beggars represent a constant source of potential trouble, a population that must be carefully managed lest their desperation lead to theft. He has heard such pleas 1,000 times before, from pickpockets and cut purses, from confidence men and common thieves. Then you will have proper documentation to that effect. The test that will determine whether Father Benedict's letter will provide genuine protection or prove to be merely worthless parchment. With trembling fingers, you retrieve the document from your inner pouch and present it to the sergeant with a mumbled prayer that his literacy extends beyond the basic reading required for his office. His monastic education making the Latin as clear to him as English. This appears to be a legitimate document, he announces, properly sealed and written in the appropriate form. Father Benedict is known to me as a careful and conscientious priest who would not issue such a letter lightly. I believe this man's claim to be deserving of charity rather than punishment. The new ordinances require all beggars to carry letters of recommendation from their parish priests or other recognized authorities. Those found begging without such papers are to be treated as vagrants and punished accordingly. He hands the letter back to you with obvious reluctance, as if parting with potential evidence of wrongdoing. You carefully return the precious document to its hiding place, acutely aware that you have used up one of its limited applications. Days blend into weeks, weeks into months, when each 24-hour period is defined entirely by the search for food and shelter. 18 months, brother, you reply after careful consideration. Perhaps 20. Time passes strangely when one has no calendar but hunger and no clock but the church bells. Each time the letter is examined and accepted, it becomes slightly less credible, slightly more suspect. Eventually, its protective power will be exhausted, and you will once again be vulnerable to arrest and punishment. Very well, he says gruffly. You may continue about your business, but mark me well, beggar. I will be watching. His weathered face creased with what might be either compassion or professional interest. Tell me, Thomas, he says, using the name from your letter, how long have you been living this way? How long since the fire that destroyed your workshop and scattered your family? One report of theft, one complaint from a merchant, one instance of disturbing the peace, and your letter will not protect you from the stocks. The distinction between the truly desperate and the genuinely criminal is often impossible to discern. And in his experience, it is safer to assume guilt than to risk being deceived by a clever performance, violence, or civil disorder. A heavy hand falls upon your shoulder. What business have you in this market? Holding it up to the weak sunlight as if searching for signs of forgery. His lips move silently as he struggles through the Latin phrases, and you realize with growing alarm that his reading skills may not be adequate to fully comprehend the document's contents. A bailiff who cannot read a letter of recommendation is likely to reject it simply to avoid admitting his ignorance. But you hesitate to produce it immediately. A voice from behind interrupts the tense examination. Sergeant William, perhaps I might be of assistance. You turn to see Brother Francis, the Franciscan friar you encountered earlier, approaching with the measured pace of someone accustomed to intervening in disputes. His brown robes and obvious literacy make him a natural mediator in conflicts between the authorities and the poor. In your experience, showing documentation too quickly can be interpreted as suspicious, as if you were prepared for interrogation because you expected to be caught in wrongdoing. Instead, you adopt the posture of humble submission that has served you well in previous encounters with authority. I've been watching you skulk about like a cur looking for scraps. This is a place of honest trade, not a feeding ground for vagabonds and thieves. You turn to find yourself face to face with Sergeant William, one of the town's bailiffs, whose duty it is to maintain order in the marketplace and ensure that the king's peace is preserved among the merchants and customers. Your relief at securing the apple is short-lived. Sergeant William is a man shaped by his profession. You there, he says, his voice carrying the authority of the crown itself. Your hand instinctively moves to the precious letter of recommendation hidden in your tunic. Please, good sergeant, you say. Your voice pitched to convey maximum deference. I am no thief, but a poor man fallen on hard times through God's will. I seek only the scraps that others discard, the refuse that would otherwise feed the rats and dogs. I have harmed no one and taken nothing that was not already thrown away. Sergeant William's eyes narrow as he studies your face, searching for signs of deception or criminal intent. 12 p.m. The test of documentation. If you are truly a legitimate recipient of charity, Sergeant William declares, this is the moment you have been dreading. Sergeant William examines the letter with obvious suspicion, but fortune, for once, favors you. Brother Francis examines the letter with practiced eyes. 12:30 p.m. The verdict and its consequences. Sergeant William S. Relief at having the burden of decision removed from his shoulders is visible in the relaxation of his posture. The threat hangs in the air like incense as the sergeant moves away, continuing his patrol through the crowded marketplace. Brother Francis lingers for a moment after the sergeant's departure. The question catches you off guard, not because it is unexpected, but because it forces you to calculate time in ways that your current existence rarely requires. 1 p.m. The friar's offer Brother Francis nods thoughtfully, as if your answer confirms some theory he has been developing about the nature of poverty and its effects on the human spirit. On one hand, any association with a respected religious figure could provide protection and possibly access to resources beyond your current reach. On the other hand, you are suspicious of offers that seem too generous, too convenient. In your experience, unexpected kindness often comes with hidden costs that become apparent only after it is too late to withdraw. I have been observing the poor of this town for some time, he says, as part of my order's mission to understand and serve those who suffer, revealing a scene that takes your breath away. Each day at the hour of sext, we provide bread and soup to any who come in need. There are no questions asked about worthiness or desert, no examinations of documentation or moral character. The only requirement is hunger, and I believe you qualify admirably in that regard. The interior of the building is filled with people like yourself, despite every instinct screaming at you to devour the food as quickly as possible. The sound of people who have found momentary respite from the struggle of survival. You catch fragments of stories. Soon, he must return to the streets, to the endless search for survival that defines every waking moment of life at the margins of medieval society. Tales of misfortune and loss that echo your own experiences, but remind you that suffering, while intensely personal, is also universally shared among those who have fallen through the cracks of medieval society. Experience has taught you that eating too fast after prolonged hunger leads to painful cramps, and sometimes the loss of the precious meal through vomiting. Instead, you savor each spoonful, feeling the warmth spread through your chest and stomach, the sensation of actual nourishment beginning to restore some small measure of strength to your depleted body. The poor, the sick, the displaced, the forgotten, but unlike the desperate isolation you have grown accustomed to, let the gentle sound of rain remind you of the simple miracle of shelter, of warmth, of the basic human dignity that comes from having enough to eat. This medieval beggar, for this brief hour, experiences something approaching peace. Here there is organization, purpose, even a kind of rough dignity. Long wooden tables are arranged in orderly rows, and at each table, men and women sit eating from wooden bowls, their conversation creating a low murmur that speaks of community rather than mere survival. Would you be willing to accompany me for a short while? There is something I would like to show you, fills your nostrils, and makes your mouth water involuntarily. A large cauldron dominates one end of the hall, where you find yourself seated between an elderly woman whose swollen joints speak of years of hard labor, filling the former with soup that steams in the cool air of the hall. The liquid is brown and thick, rich with the smell of onions and turnips, cabbage and barley, perhaps even a hint of meat for flavoring. To your starved senses, it might as well be the finest feast served at a nobleman's table. Beside the bowl, he places a chunk of bread that weighs heavy in your hands, dense with grain and substance, and a young man whose hollow eyes suggest recent trauma or loss. Neither speaks to you directly, but both acknowledge your presence with the subtle nods that serve as greeting among people who understand suffering as a shared experience. Tended by a lay brother who ladles out portions of thick vegetable soup with mechanical efficiency. Beside him, baskets of bread wait to be distributed, the loaves dark and coarse but substantial, the kind of food that could fill an empty stomach and provide strength for hours of walking, something that might provide ... opportunities. The invitation fills you with conflicting emotions, but hunger and desperation make the decision for you. The apple hidden in your tunic represents your only certain food for the day. Through the narrow streets that wind between the craftsmen's shops and the merchants' houses, his pace is measured, the walk of a man who has learned to move through the world with deliberate intention rather than desperate haste. You struggle to match his rhythm, its walls weathered by centuries of wind and rain, but still solid and imposing. Above the heavy wooden door, carved letters spell out Hospitium Sancti Spiritus, the Hospital of the Holy Spirit. This is one of the institutions that medieval Christianity has developed to address the problem of poverty and suffering, a place where the Church's theological commitment to charity takes concrete form. Your malnourished body, protesting the sustained effort of walking on uneven cobblestones, and the prospect of additional sustenance outweighs the risks of whatever Brother Francis might have in mind. I would be honored to accompany you, brother, you reply, adopting the tone of grateful humility that religious figures seem to expect from the destitute. Brother Francis leads you away from the crowded marketplace. 1:30 p.m. The hidden community. Your destination proves to be a large stone building on the outskirts of the town. Brother Francis pushes open the heavy door. Welcome to our daily meal, Brother Francis says quietly. The smell of food, ... Real food, not scraps or refuse, but actual prepared meals, ... 2 p.m. The feast of the poor Brother Francis guides you to an empty space at one of the long tables. The lay brother approaches with a wooden bowl and spoon. You force yourself to eat slowly around you. The quiet conversations of your fellow diners create a strange kind of music. As Professor Somnus's voice continues to guide you through this moment of unexpected grace. But the day is far from over, and the temporary refuge of the hospital cannot protect him from the harsh realities that await beyond its walls. Part 4. The Afternoon Trials. 2:30 p.m. Departure from grace. The meal at the Hospital of the Holy Spirit ends not with satisfaction, but with the bitter knowledge that such moments of plenty are as rare as they are precious. Brother Francis approaches your table as you finish the last drops of soup from your wooden bowl, his expression carrying the gentle regret of someone who understands that charity, however well-intentioned, can only provide temporary relief from permanent problems. I wish we could offer more than a single meal, he says quietly, his voice barely audible above the scraping of spoons and the rustle of rough clothing as the other diners prepare to return to their various struggles. But our resources are limited, and the number of those in need grows larger each month. The harvest was poor this year, and winter approaches with its own particular cruelties. You rise from the table with genuine reluctance, your stomach fuller than it has been in weeks, but your mind is already calculating how long this feeling of satiation will last. Experience has taught you that the warm glow of a proper meal fades quickly when faced with the cold reality of another night on stone, another day of uncertain prospects. The bread you were allowed to take with you, wrapped carefully in a scrap of cloth, represents security for perhaps 6 hours. 12, if you can discipline yourself to eat only when the hunger becomes truly unbearable. As you prepare to leave the sanctuary of the hospital, you notice other diners beginning their own departures. Some move with the purposeful stride of those who have somewhere specific to go, perhaps day laborers who will spend the afternoon seeking work, or peddlers who will use their temporary strength to carry their meager wares through the surrounding countryside. Others shuffle with the aimless gait of the truly homeless, those who, like yourself, must fill the remaining hours of daylight with the endless search for survival. 3:0 p.m. Return to the streets. The transition from the warm community of the hospital back to the harsh isolation of the streets is jarring, like stepping from a lit room into complete darkness. The autumn sun, never strong at this latitude, has begun its slow descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows that remind you how quickly the day is passing and how little time remains to secure shelter for the approaching night. Your first priority is to find a safe place to eat the apple you secured during the morning's scavenging. Though your stomach is currently satisfied by the hospital soup, you know that this satiation is temporary, and the apple represents a crucial bridge between now and whatever food you might be able to obtain tomorrow. But eating in public carries risks. The sight of a beggar consuming what appears to be fresh fruit might attract unwanted attention from those who would question how you came to possess it. You make your way through the narrow alleys that wind between the craftsmen's quarters, seeking a secluded spot where you can eat without observation. The apple, despite its bruises and dirt, tastes like redemption as you consume it slowly, savoring each bite while maintaining constant vigilance for approaching footsteps or voices that might signal danger. As you eat, you become aware of being watched. Across the alley, partially concealed in the doorway of an abandoned shop, another beggar observes your small feast with eyes that burn with hunger and resentment. You recognize him as Big Tom, a former soldier whose missing left arm marks him as a veteran of some forgotten conflict, whose size and volatile temper make him one of the more dangerous inhabitants of the town's shadow economy. 3:30 p.m. The politics of desperation. Big Tom's presence transforms your simple meal into a complex negotiation of survival politics. In the harsh democracy of the streets, food is power, and the display of resources inevitably attracts those who possess less. You could attempt to hide the apple, but Tom has already seen it, and pretending otherwise would only increase the tension. You could offer to share, but your previous encounters with Tom have taught you that his appetite is bottomless and his gratitude non-existent. Instead, you adopt a strategy of calculated honesty mixed with subtle threat. "Good afternoon, Tom," you say quietly, continuing to eat but positioning yourself so that escape routes remain open. Fine weather for those with places to be and business to conduct. Tom emerges from his doorway with the deliberate movements of a predator testing the defenses of potential prey. His single remaining hand rests casually on the handle of a knife that everyone knows he carries, though no one has seen him use it yet. "Fine weather indeed, Thomas Cooper," he replies, using your former trade name with the mocking emphasis that reminds you how far you have fallen. Fine enough that honest men might share their good fortune with those less blessed by circumstance. The implicit threat hangs between you like smoke from a funeral pyre. Tom's request is not really a request, and both of you understand the violent potential lurking beneath his casual words. But you also know that yielding to his demands would establish a precedent that would make every future meal a source of conflict and fear. The apple is nearly finished anyway, and the core that remains is hardly worth fighting over. 4:00 p.m. The afternoon hunt begins. With the confrontation diffused through a combination of careful timing and diplomatic eating, you begin the afternoon phase of your daily survival routine. The hours between the midday meal and evening represent a crucial window of opportunity, when the town's commercial life reaches its peak and the chances of finding discarded food or earning small coins are at their highest. Your destination is the area around the town's inn, where travelers and merchants conduct business over ale and roasted meat. The Crossed Keys Inn serves as the commercial heart of the town's trade with the outside world, where goods are bought and sold, deals are struck, and information flows like wine. For a beggar, it represents both opportunity and extreme danger, a place where wealth and poverty exist in uncomfortable proximity. The inn's refuse heap, located discreetly behind the main building, attracts scavengers from across the town's population of desperate poor. Here, the remnants of meals too rich for normal consumption are discarded with careless abundance, bones still heavy with meat, bread crusts soaked in gravy, vegetables barely past their prime. But accessing this treasure requires careful timing and considerable risk, as the innkeeper employs a large dog specifically trained to drive away unauthorized visitors to his property. You position yourself across the muddy lane from the inn's rear entrance, watching the patterns of activity that will determine your strategy. The dog, a massive mastiff with jaws capable of crushing bone, is currently chained near the stable entrance, well within range of the refuse heap, but momentarily distracted by the arrival of a merchant's wagon. The kitchen servants are busy with the afternoon's preparations, their attention focused inward on the demanding work of feeding paying customers. 4:30 p.m., the scavenging raid. The opportunity comes when the inn's cook emerges from the kitchen carrying a large wooden bucket filled with the day's accumulated scraps. She moves with the brisk efficiency of someone performing a routine task, dumping the contents onto the heap without ceremony before hurrying back to her duties. The sound of the bucket being emptied carries clearly across the lane, and you know that within minutes, other scavengers will arrive to compete for the newly available resources. You wait just long enough for the cook to disappear back into the kitchen, then begin your approach with the careful stealth of a hunter stalking dangerous prey. The dog notices your movement immediately, its massive head turning in your direction with the alert interest of a predator recognizing potential sport. But the chain that holds it is just short enough to keep it from reaching the refuse heap, a calculation made by an innkeeper who wants to discourage scavenging without completely preventing the natural disposal of waste. The heap yields treasures beyond your most optimistic expectations. A piece of roasted fowl with significant meat, still clinging to the bones, several chunks of bread that are stale but not moldy, and most valuable of all, a small piece of cheese that someone apparently found too strong for their delicate palate. You work quickly but methodically, stuffing the best items into the hidden pouches of your tunic, while the dog strains against its chain, its barks growing increasingly frantic. Your raid is interrupted by the sound of approaching voices, merchant customers emerging from the inn after concluding their business. You recognize the voice of Master Baldwin, a wool trader whose dealings have made him one of the town's most prosperous citizens, discussing prices and delivery schedules with a colleague. Their conversation grows louder as they round the corner of the building, and you realize that discovery is imminent. 5:0 p.m. Flight and pursuit. The choice between flight and concealment requires split-second decision-making, informed by months of experience in similar situations. Concealment offers the possibility of avoiding detection entirely, but if discovered, you would be trapped with nowhere to run. Flight guarantees that you will be seen, but it also ensures that you can escape with your pilfered food intact, provided you can outrun any pursuit. You choose flight, rising from your crouch and sprinting across the muddy lane with an agility born of desperation. Behind you, Master Baldwin's voice rises in indignation as he realizes what he has witnessed. "Stop, thief! Someone stop that beggar. He's been stealing from Master Robert's refuse." The accusation of theft, even theft of garbage, transforms your strategic retreat into a potential matter of life and death. In medieval law, the distinction between taking discarded refuse and stealing property is often determined by the mood of the accuser and the prejudices of the authorities rather than any objective standard of justice. A beggar caught taking food scraps can easily find himself branded as a common thief, subject to punishments ranging from public humiliation to mutilation or death. You run through the narrow alleys with the practiced efficiency of someone who has mapped every shortcut and hiding place in the town. Behind you, the sounds of pursuit echo off the stone walls. The heavy breathing of Master Baldwin, grown soft from years of prosperity, the lighter footsteps of his younger companion, and most ominously, the approaching boots of the town watch responding to the cry of thief. 5:30 p.m. Sanctuary in shadow. Your flight leads you through a maze of interconnected courtyards and passages that exist in the spaces between the town's official geography. These are the territories of the dispossessed, the forgotten corners where society's cast-offs gather to share their misery and occasionally their meager resources. Here, among the crumbling walls and broken timber, you find temporary sanctuary from pursuit. You press yourself into the shadow of a partially collapsed building, fighting to control your breathing while listening for sounds of continued search. The stolen food feels like lead in your pouches, its weight a constant reminder of the risk you have taken and the punishment that awaits if you are caught. But hunger is a more immediate master than fear, and the smell of the roasted meat makes your mouth water despite the danger. Gradually, the sounds of pursuit fade as your pursuers give up the chase. Master Baldwin's indignation, however justified he might feel it to be, cannot sustain the effort required to track a single beggar through the labyrinthine alleys of the poor quarter. The town watch has more pressing concerns than the theft of garbage, and their half-hearted search peters out as other duties demand their attention. But victory in this small skirmish comes with its own costs. You are now a marked man, known to Master Baldwin and his associates as a thief who preys upon honest merchants. Word of your raid will spread through the business community, making future scavenging more dangerous and reducing the already slim chances that someone might offer you legitimate work or charity. 6:00 p.m. The day's accounting. As the afternoon light begins to fade toward evening, you take inventory of the day's accumulated resources and risks. Your pouches contain the bread from the hospital, the food stolen from the inn's refuse heap, and the few copper coins earned during the morning's begging. By the standards of your current existence, this represents a successful day, enough sustenance to last until tomorrow and perhaps even a small reserve for unexpected needs. But success in the economy of survival is always temporary, always shadowed by the knowledge that tomorrow will bring its own challenges and uncertainties. The food you have gathered will not last more than a day or two. The coins in your purse represent security that can evaporate with a single mishap. And your reputation in the town has been further damaged by the afternoon's desperate raid. You emerge from your hiding place as the church bell tolls the hour of vespers, calling the faithful to evening prayer. The sound echoes across the town like a bronze benediction, marking the transition from day to night, from the active pursuit of sustenance to the passive endurance of darkness. Soon, the respectable citizens will retreat to their homes and hearths, leaving the streets to those who have nowhere else to go. The long afternoon of trials is ending, but the night approaches with its own particular terrors. Cold, darkness, and the constant threat of violence await those who must spend their sleeping hours exposed to the elements and the predations of others equally desperate. Your stomach is fuller than it has been in weeks, but your spirit is as empty as ever, worn down by the grinding necessity of survival and the constant erosion of human dignity that defines life at the very bottom of medieval society. Sleep approaches, dear listeners, as Professor Somnus's voice guides you toward the peaceful rest that this medieval beggar can only dream of finding. Let the sound of rain against your windows remind you of the simple miracle of shelter, of warmth, of the basic security that allows you to sleep without fear. Act V. The Evening Descent. 6:30 p.m. The fading light. The approach of evening in a medieval town brings with it a transformation as profound as any conjurer's magic. As the weak autumn sun begins its final descent toward the horizon, the character of the streets changes entirely. The honest merchants and craftsmen who define the day's rhythm begin their retreat to the safety of their homes, leaving behind a very different population to claim dominion over the darkening alleys and squares. You watch from your shadowed doorway as Master William the candlemaker hurries past, his day's work complete, a leather satchel of coins clutched protectively against his chest. His eyes dart nervously from side to side, acutely aware that the approaching darkness brings with it increased risks for anyone foolish enough to display obvious wealth. Behind him, his apprentice carries the tools of their trade, the molds and wicks and blocks of precious beeswax that represent their livelihood, equally vulnerable to the desperate hands that emerge when honest folk seek their beds. The transformation is not merely social, but sensory. The sounds of legitimate commerce, the ring of hammers on anvils, the calls of merchants hawking their wares, the rumble of loaded carts on cobblestones, gradually give way to a different symphony. Footsteps become furtive, conversations drop to whispers, and the overall volume of human activity decreases, even as its potential for violence increases exponentially. You understand, with the hard-won wisdom of months spent navigating this twilight world, that the next few hours will test every survival skill you have developed. Evening is when desperation reaches its peak, when those who have failed to secure food or shelter during the day's hunting must make increasingly dangerous choices about how to survive the approaching night. 7:00 p.m. The gathering darkness. As the last traces of natural light fade from the sky, you begin the careful journey toward your intended sleeping place. But first, you must navigate the complex social geography of the town's evening economy, where legitimate and illegitimate activities blur together in the shadows between buildings. Your path takes you past Mother Agnes's alehouse, a ramshackle establishment that caters to the town's more questionable population. Through the grimy windows, you can see the interior lit by smoky tallow candles, filled with the kind of customers who prefer to conduct their business away from the scrutinizing gaze of respectable society. Day laborers drink away their meager wages. Traveling merchants of dubious reputation negotiate deals that might not bear close examination, and local criminals gather to plan activities that will take advantage of the night's concealing darkness. The alehouse represents a source of potential opportunity, as drunken customers sometimes drop coins or leave behind partially consumed meals. But it also represents extreme danger, as the establishment's clientele includes men who would think nothing of beating a beggar to death for the few coppers in his purse. You have seen the results of such violence. Bodies discovered in the morning, stripped of everything valuable, left as gruesome reminders of what happens to those who miscalculate the risks of scavenging in the wrong territories. Standing in the alehouse doorway, you recognize the silhouette of Red Hugh, a former soldier whose missing eye and scarred face tell stories of battles both military and personal. Hugh has carved out a niche in the town's shadow economy as someone who solves problems that cannot be addressed through legitimate channels. A man whose services are available to anyone with sufficient coin and insufficient scruples. His presence here tonight suggests that someone has business that requires his particular expertise. 7:30 p.m. The underground economy. The approach of full darkness reveals aspects of town life that remain hidden during the honest hours of daylight. In doorways and narrow passages, transactions take place that would scandalize the respectable citizens, now safely barricaded behind their locked doors and shuttered windows. This is the hour when the desperate sell whatever they possess of value, when stolen goods change hands, when survival trumps morality in the harsh arithmetic of medieval existence. You witness a young woman, perhaps 16 years old, negotiating with a well-dressed merchant whose expensive cloak cannot quite conceal the predatory gleam in his eyes. Her desperation is written in every line of her posture, in the way she clutches a bundle that might contain her only possessions, in the hollow resignation of her voice, as she discusses terms that both parties understand will leave her diminished and him satisfied. The transaction, when it concludes, will technically be legal under the complex laws governing debt and service, but its moral weight will rest heavily on souls that have learned to compartmentalize conscience for the sake of survival. Nearby, in the shadow of the grain merchant's storehouse, you observe a more obviously criminal enterprise unfolding. Two men work with practiced efficiency to break the seal on a warehouse door, their movements coordinated by months or years of partnership in such activities. The grain they steal will be sold in neighboring towns, where questions about its provenance will not be asked too closely. The profits divided among a network of accomplices that extends far beyond this single night's work. You remain carefully invisible during these observations, understanding that witnessing such activities makes you a potential threat to their security, and therefore a target for elimination. The unwritten laws of the town's criminal underground are clear. Those who see too much and cannot be trusted to remain silent have a tendency to disappear entirely, their bodies joining the anonymous corpses that the river deposits downstream with depressing regularity. 8:00 p.m. The search for shelter. With full darkness now descended upon the town like a suffocating blanket, your primary concern shifts from the acquisition of resources to the more immediate need for shelter. The temperature is dropping steadily, and the dampness in the air suggests that the night's rain will be heavier than the gentle drizzle that marked the day. Without adequate protection from the elements, even your relatively successful day of scavenging could end in disaster. Your options are limited and fraught with their own particular dangers. The most obvious shelters: doorways of closed shops, the covered areas around the market square, the spaces beneath the church's exterior stairs, are also the most contested. Other homeless individuals have already claimed the best spots, and attempting to dislodge them could result in violence that your malnourished body is ill-equipped to survive. The stable behind the Crossed Keys Inn represents a possibility, as the warmth from the horses could provide life-saving heat during the coldest hours before dawn. But the inn's mastiff still patrols the area, and your earlier raid on the refuse heap has likely made you a marked target for special attention. The risk of being savaged by the animal, or discovered by the inn staff and turned over to the authorities, outweighs the potential benefits of warm shelter. Your best option appears to be returning to the familiar alcove behind the tannery where you spent the previous night. The location offers protection from the wind and some shelter from rain, while remaining far enough from high-traffic areas to avoid unwanted attention. Most importantly, it is territory you have successfully defended before, a small piece of urban geography that you can claim as temporarily your own. 8:30 p.m. The night's preparation. The journey back to your sleeping place requires careful navigation through streets that have been transformed by darkness into an alien landscape. Without the benefit of artificial lighting, familiar landmarks become invisible, and the risk of becoming lost in your own neighborhood increases dramatically. You move slowly and deliberately, feeling your way along walls and counting steps between known reference points. The night air carries sounds that would be inaudible during the day's cacophony. The distant bark of a dog responding to some perceived threat, the creak of timber settling in the cooling air, the splash of liquid being emptied from an upper window without regard for anyone who might be passing below. Each sound requires evaluation as either potential threat or mere background noise, and your survival depends on making such distinctions correctly. As you approach the tannery, you discover that your intended sleeping spot has been claimed by another beggar, an elderly woman whose violent coughing suggests advanced illness. The ethical implications of displacing someone even more vulnerable than yourself war, with the practical necessity of securing shelter before the night's weather worsens. In a world where compassion is a luxury that few can afford, even the destitute must sometimes compete against each other for the basic requirements of survival. The woman looks up as you approach, her eyes reflecting what little starlight penetrates the narrow alley. "Please," she whispers, her voice barely audible above the wind beginning to pick up strength. "I'll not live to see another winter. Grant an old woman this small mercy, and God will surely bless your charity." 9:00 p.m. The moral calculus of survival. Her plea forces you to confront one of the most difficult aspects of life at society's margins. The way that desperation can corrupt even the most basic human impulses toward kindness and mutual aid. In a world where there is not enough of anything, food, shelter, safety, dignity, to go around, even the poorest must sometimes choose between their own survival and their moral principles. You study the old woman more carefully, noting the blue tinge around her lips that suggests serious illness, the way her hands shake with something more than just cold, the labored quality of her breathing that speaks of lungs damaged by years of exposure and inadequate nutrition. She is dying, probably within weeks, and the knowledge sits between you like a physical presence. The practical calculation is brutally simple. You are younger, stronger, more likely to survive the winter ahead if you can maintain access to adequate shelter. Yielding your sleeping place to her might represent Christian charity, but it could also represent your own death sentence if the combination of cold and damp overwhelms your already weakened constitution. In the harsh democracy of the streets, sentiment is a luxury that kills those who indulge in it too freely. But you are not yet so degraded by your circumstances that such calculations come easily. The memory of your former life, when you were Thomas the Cooper, with a wife and children and a place in the community's moral order, still exerts enough influence to make you hesitate. The man you once were would never have considered displacing a dying woman from even the most meager shelter. 9:30 p.m. The compromise of conscience. Your solution, when it comes, represents the kind of creative problem-solving that extreme circumstances demand. Rather than claiming the entire alcove for yourself or yielding it completely to the old woman, you propose a sharing arrangement that might allow both of you to survive the night's ordeal. "Mother," you say, using the respectful address that her age demands despite her current circumstances, "the night grows cold and the rain approaches. Perhaps we might share this shelter, pooling our warmth against the darkness that threatens us both." The practical benefits of the arrangement are immediately apparent. Two bodies can generate significantly more heat than one, and the psychological comfort of human companionship, however minimal, provides some protection against the despair that can prove as deadly as any physical threat. But the risks are equally obvious. Sharing space with a stranger means vulnerability to theft, violence, or simply the transmission of whatever disease has reduced the old woman to her current extremity. She accepts your proposal with the desperate gratitude of someone who understands that any human kindness, however limited, might represent the difference between surviving the night and surrendering to the cold that has already claimed so many of her peers. Together, you arrange your meager possessions to create the most effective possible barrier against the wind, using scraps of cloth and pieces of wood to construct a shelter that is pathetic by any objective standard but represents the height of luxury in your current circumstances. 10:00 p.m. The descent into night. As you settle into your shared shelter, the old woman's presence transforms your solitary ordeal into something approaching human fellowship. Her name, she tells you, between fits of coughing, is Martha, and she was once a baker's wife, in a village 2 days' walk from here. Fire took her shop, fever took her husband, and debt took everything else. A story so similar to your own that it might have been copied from the same manuscript of misery. Martha's conversation, whispered to avoid attracting unwanted attention, provides a welcome distraction from the immediate discomforts of cold stone and damp air. She speaks of her former life with the kind of detailed memory that suggests these recollections serve as her primary defense against the degradation of her current existence. The smell of fresh bread in her ovens, the satisfaction of providing sustenance to her neighbors, the simple dignity of honest work, honestly rewarded. These memories are treasures more precious than gold to someone who has lost everything else. But her stories also serve as painful reminders of your own losses, of the life that once seemed permanent and secure, but proved to be as fragile as morning mist. The workshop where you shaped oak staves into sturdy barrels, the pride you took in craftsmanship passed down through generations, the community respect that came with guild membership and honest labor. All of it gone as completely as if it had never existed. 10:30 p.m. The long vigil begins. True sleep, you know from experience, will not come during these dark hours. What awaits instead is a kind of suspended consciousness, a state somewhere between waking and dreaming, where time stretches like warm honey and every sound carries the potential for mortal threat. You will doze fitfully, starting awake at every noise, fighting constantly against the cold that seeps through your inadequate clothing and into your very bones. Martha's breathing grows increasingly labored as the night progresses, her coughs becoming more frequent and violent. Each spasm racks her frail body with convulsions that you can feel through the stone beneath you, and you begin to fear that you may wake to find yourself sharing shelter with a corpse. The prospect terrifies you not because of any squeamishness about death. You have seen too much of it in recent months to retain such delicate sensibilities, but because discovering a body might implicate you in suspicious circumstances that could prove legally disastrous. The sounds of the night city create a symphony of danger and desperation around your fragile shelter. Somewhere in the distance, voices are raised in anger, followed by the sound of running feet, and perhaps the clash of metal on metal. Violence is erupting in some other corner of the town's shadow world, and you offer a silent prayer that it will remain confined to whatever territory breeds such conflicts. Closer to your position, you hear the distinctive sound of someone moving stealthily through the alley, their footsteps carefully placed to minimize noise. Whether this represents a criminal avoiding detection, another homeless person seeking shelter, or simply someone with legitimate but private business, you cannot determine. But you grip the small knife hidden in your tunic, a pathetic weapon, but better than none, and prepare to defend your meager territory, if necessary. The night stretches ahead like an eternity of cold and fear, broken only by Martha's labored breathing and the distant sounds of a world that continues its ancient dance of cruelty and survival. But you have endured such nights before, and somewhere deep in your exhausted spirit, you find the stubborn spark of determination that separates the living from the dead in this harsh medieval world. Sleep peacefully, dear listeners, as my voice carries you toward the rest that this medieval beggar can only dream of finding. Let the sound of rain against your windows remind you of the simple miracle of safety, of warmth, of the basic human dignity that comes from having a place to call home. And so, dear dreamer, as the echoes of history fade and the quiet of the night settles in, may your mind find peace and your dreams take you to places even time cannot touch. Until next time, sleep well and dream deeply.